Hello, and welcome to our presentation. So pleased you could join us today to hear about high net worth or complex cases and whether these types of cases can be settled out of court. This is Winning Without War. I am Lisa Zonder, and I am joined here today by attorney Michael Heiklin and Claire Heiklin.
Hi, how are you?
Hello.
So nice to have you both on the panel. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides so that we can go through our presentation. So bear with me a second as I pull these up. All right, and here we are. So Winning Without War, settling your California complex or high conflict divorce out of court. And of course, as always, pictures of the main two presenters. Claire will present herself as well through our conversation, and of course the professional disclaimers. So reminder today that we are here for educational purposes only. General information is being shared. This is not a confidential space, it's a public space. And our focus today is on California law from the two attorneys. And I'm going to give you a bit about me, just so you know who is presenting here. I'm Lisa Zonder. I'm a California attorney with over 30 years of experience in the field of family law. And I am a CFLS, which is Certified Family Law Specialist. I am certified by the State Bar of California, Board of Legal Specialization. And I also am a mediator in a variety of domains. So I do private mediation for couples in Zoom, in virtual space. I do it in the office. And as a volunteer as well, I mediate sometimes for the public courts, and that's called a daily settlement officer. My caseload generally consists of moderate to complex and then high net worth divorces. I previously practiced at Trope and Trope, which was one of the state's largest family law firms. I was very honored to have my what I'll call boot camp training there at Trope and Trope and at other offices in Beverly Hills, including Neil Hirsch. And so I've worked on celebrity divorce cases and mediations with a lot of high net worth couples and some more on the moderate side, lots of different families. I also, sometimes I help out with a statewide divorce nonprofit group, and I serve as a divorce mediator when time permits. So that's a little bit about me. There's more about me on my website, which I'll give to you at the end, but it's zonderfamilylaw.com. And so I'll put that on the final slide as well, the contact information. But for now, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Michael Heiklin, and I am also a family law attorney. I do something a little bit different than Lisa. I primarily handle high conflict divorce, licensed in California. So everything we're going to talk about today is primarily will be related to California issues. I mostly handle women in marriages that are getting divorced from high conflict men. And most of the references that I make today will be in reference when I talk about the high conflict spouse, I'll be talking about the husband. And when I say the aggrieved spouse, I mean the wife. Now that doesn't have to be that way, okay? It can definitely flip around. I've had cases where I handle the men against high conflict women, but it just makes it easier if I refer for us, so I don't have to explain it every time. It makes it easier if when I say the wife, it's the aggrieved spouse just for this exercise, and the husband will be the high conflict spouse. So I've been in practice for over 30 years. I also handle my share of celebrity cases and difficult situations. And that's almost my entire practice is high conflict divorce.
Thank you for that, Michael. Okay, so it seems like we're going to be able to cover a lot of ground today by virtue of this case study. So we're sharing with you a case study of a mediation that is both complex and high net worth. It's an amalgamation of many different issues that have been presented over decades of practice. So this doesn't represent one single client. So I don't want any client looking at this saying, that's me, exactly. No, it's not. It's an amalgamation. So let's review the bullet points here. So in this case, the couple has two children, one in college, one in graduate school. The husband is a surgeon and he has a surgery center. The valuation of his medical practice is one of the issues in the case. They were married 20 years. Wife is a stay-at-home mom. He earns $50,000 a month. And a little complication here. He's had a girlfriend who's 15 years his wife's junior, and the kids caught on to his extramarital activities. And unfortunately, it's been going on a long time. So as a divorce professional, Michael, you and I think about like, well, how much money was spent on these extramarital activities, extracurricular activities too. So these folks, the husband and wife, they own 5 real properties. A couple of them are commercial properties, one office buildings. One is a house where they live, their primary residence. The other, it's his medical practice, the surgery center, and so on. So he says he wants to stay out of court. Another monkey wrench in this case study is that he is a narcissist, high conflict type, and has unpaid taxes. So wow, what a litany of issues that presents for the attorney who gets a client like this, or the mediator who encounters this type of case. And what if you are the husband or wife in this situation, right? So one of the questions that's going to come up is, well, what process am I a fit for? Is this case actually going to be able to settle? Because who knows, right? Every case is going to be a little bit different. So the question that arises is, what's on the menu? So what's on the menu, the options on the menu would be mediation, possibly, collaborative divorce, possibly, lawyer-to-lawyer negotiation, possibly, and then court or trial. So court hearings and or a trial, right, if the case doesn't settle. So what is divorce mediation? Divorce mediation, simply put, is when you have a neutral mediation professional, such as myself, an attorney, helping the couples to reach mutually beneficial agreements on the topic of divorce, any of their divorce-related issues. And my role as the divorce mediator with my background is to facilitate, to educate, and to help draft an agreement, assuming the parties reach an agreement, while remaining neutral the entire time. So the other options are going to be collaborative divorce, lawyer-to-lawyer negotiation, and staying out of court. So for this, I'm going to turn your attention to my next slide, which is trying to lay out the basic, overview of your options. So if you're in this situation and you're trying to figure out what option would work for you, these are some of the things you need to know. And it doesn't matter if it's a complex case, meaning there's like maybe some power imbalance or dynamic of high conflict personality, substance abuse, or it's a high net worth mediation or something, moderate to high net worth. Keep in mind that in order to be in a mediation process, both of the spouses have to agree to participate in the mediation. It's an out of court by agreement process, and the clients get to decide that. So in this process, if you look at the slide, each of the clients have what I put as an ICA, or independent consulting mediation attorney, in the background. Ideally, they have some counsel in the background to ask questions. And we'll talk about this in more detail later, but we frequently will add a neutral financial professional because that person would be tasked with, especially in these complex or high net worth cases, they would be able to gather all the financial data, educate the clients about what's there, especially for someone who's been the out spouse, who doesn't know everything that's in the estate. She's not necessarily working in the surgeon's office. She doesn't know what the books are. She says, look, I mean, he had a CPA and a bookkeeper, and I wasn't involved with the finances. So in this case, she doesn't really have all the information she needs. She doesn't have, his profit and loss statements, stuff that would be important to know to understand how to divide property and how to get support set. So in this case, we could bring in, and normally would bring in, a financial who educates. In the collaborative divorce, in the middle column there, I'm not going to spend too much time on that process, except to say that in this case, each client is represented by counsel in real time. So if you're in the collaborative divorce conference room having your meeting, you're going to have your attorney by your side, physically present in the room in collaborative divorce. And then you could add other people onto the team, just like you can in mediation by agreement. Collaborative divorce is also an agreement only process, meaning you both need to agree to it. We can't force people into collaborative, right? That doesn't work. So in the court process, and so again, I just want to reiterate here, in the collaborative process, the clients can also decide on the settlement terms that out of court, and the professionals, generally speaking, if they're doing a true collaborative divorce case, they're going to sign an agreement that says that we're going to stay out of court and we're incentivized to try and solve your case and help you settle it. We're supporting your settlement, and every person we bring onto this team is there to support you and help you. So you're heavily resourced. When you go to the court process, that is a spectrum of options. In that process, the lawyers can negotiate a resolution out of court, which Michael's going to talk about in greater detail. And if you're unsuccessful with that, you're going to have to resort to the court where the judges decide. So I just want to make a point here that in mediation, what's beneficial for clients is that they generally are able to save time and money. They can maintain the privacy. They don't have to put all of these allegations in the court pleadings and air their public, dirty laundry, if you will. So they don't have to do that. So that, to me, the court process would be a last resort process. So the privacy is there, generally speaking, and it also tends to be a way to reduce conflict compared to high stakes trials. Okay, so that's an overview of the process. Michael, is there anything you wanted to make a comment before I move on this one?
Yeah, actually I did. With regard to collaborative, could you speak a little bit about what happens to the attorneys in the event that there is no agreement?
Right. So the collaborative divorce stipulation or agreement that the parties sign generally says that both counsel are disqualified from going to court. The reason a lot of attorneys even have such a visceral reaction that's not good. Like, wait, what do you mean? I'm going to lose my job? I'm out of a job if this doesn't resolve itself? And the answer is yes. You're not there to go make money chasing down court. You're there incentivized to settle the case. That's your focus. Your job is to focus. We want to keep you accountable. We want to keep you on task. This is what you're doing. And, that's a huge commitment from an attorney to a client. It could be scary, but the flip side of it is that really speaks to the gravity, the depth of the commitment on the part of the professional who's sitting there, any professionals on the team, because you could also have divorce coaches who are trained mental health professionals acting in a different capacity. They're not psychotherapizing. They're not using their license in that way. They're supporting the communications in the team. They could be there as a child specialist to help the parties understand what's age appropriate for the parents, so they know what might be in the best interest of their children in coming to an agreement on parenting issues. That's a great question, Michael. Anything else that you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I do. So with regard to what I do, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, the collaborative approach generally doesn't work with high conflict personalities, but that doesn't mean that mediation doesn't work. It just means that the collaborative approach generally doesn't work because there's only a handful of, I shouldn't say a handful, but there are lawyers who I hate use the word specialize, but concentrate on high conflict divorce. And there are only so many of them that are around, and you don't want to be in a collaborative situation where if the other side does not agree to something, you have to get rid of your lawyer. There are other ways to handle it, and even to be in mediation without doing the collaborative process. But in a high conflict situation, it's generally not the best choice.
Right. And I'm going to agree with you as a general proposition. If you don't have recourse to a judge, right? And we're going to look at these on a case by case basis. Anybody who's doing intake and screening of for a collaborative case need to be aware of all the nuances, which I think Claire is going to get into, of who you're dealing with. So you have to know your participants, know your clients. And if you feel as the professional that that is too much of a risk to take because you need to be able to have recourse to a judge in a courtroom, then collaborative may not be your right process. And so that's something to consider, definitely something to look at. And so I'm going to go to the next slide. And okay, so then we raise the question of, is my complex high net worth divorce case a good fit for mediation? And here are some of the considerations that I've thought of and thrown into my slide, which is, I want to say at the end of all of this is that it's a myth that a high conflict or high net worth case can't be negotiated. I do believe that that is very possible. It may not be in every instance. I think Claire is going to give us some more insight into that as we go along, but definitely, you know, Michael will speak to that as well, because he certainly specializes in these high conflict cases and getting them resolved. But here are some of the consideration. Like, first off, as I said earlier, parties need to agree to stay out of court, so then they can consider that mediation or collaborative as an option. We need both parties in mediation to be able to, sit there in the negotiation room at the table without their attorneys present, because that's how most of these mediations are done. Really, people select into mediation to try and not lawyer up. They're trying to economize. One of the questions that's always come up is the emotional divorce sort of done, or is the grieving process complete? Is there a potential that either party's hiding assets? Just like you said, Michael, with the collaborative, if you have somebody who there's a very high risk you're going to need, high likelihood, I'll say, that you need to go to a judge. Same thing is true here. If there's a high likelihood that someone's hiding assets, you might not be best served at a mediation. Again, everything needs to be looked at case by case, and facts, are different in every case. We need the parties to be able to communicate civilly. Are both parties thoroughly prepared to negotiate? In other words, do they have all the material facts and information that they need to be able to sit at that table and make good decisions for themselves? One thing that, occurs to me too is, if a parent is denying parenting time to the other, that might not be right for a mediation, unless that person has a change of heart, before mediation starts. Are the parties flexible rather than rigid? If you have somebody who's not receptive to any settlement proposals, and it's always my way or the highway, hostage negotiation type situation, you're probably not going to be very well served in a mediation. And we always look at power imbalances and the level of trust between the parties as well. I just want to reiterate there that Michael and I both firmly believe that there are complex cases and high net worth cases that can be mediated. Again, my thoughts here are that is going to be on a case by case basis. And Michael, I'm going to give you a moment to just weigh in here on this slide.
I agree with you. I think it is case by case, but what I'm primarily looking for with regard to, first of all, I'm going to get into why mediation is a better option than litigation. Excuse me. I'll talk about that when it's my turn to speak. But for right now, I absolutely agree that you can get a complex, high conflict case resolved in mediation or simply attorney negotiations. What it generally takes is that the high conflict spouse, the husband in this case, as we're using him as an example, the husband in this case has more motivation to settle in mediation than he does to be in court. Now, there are advantages that we'll talk about later with regard to him being in court, but there are also disadvantages, and one of them is that it's a public forum, that generally everything that goes on in court is part of a public record. And there are often these high conflict spouses don't believe that the law applies to them. And because of that, they may have done things that it's in their best interest to keep private. The mediation is usually a private process, and the only thing the court will know in the end is what the outcome is. But if there are things that this high conflict spouse did that are criminal or subject them to civil liability, who knows? Maybe they stole money from a partner, right? Or they didn't pay their taxes or something like that. Those situations are things that they don't want on the public record. They don't want that coming out in court. So if there's leverage against the high conflict spouse, it's often much easier to get it resolved in mediation and quicker and a better alternative.
Right. And so I would say that everybody should be thinking about the mediation. It doesn't mean they'll land in mediation, but they should be contemplating and assessing whether that option would be a good fit for them. Of course, it takes two to tango. So they need their spouse to cooperate and agree to come into a private divorce mediation. So yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to move on to our next slide and just talk about what enhanced team mediation is. So I work with clients often to enlist what I call the allied professionals in the mediation team. The same could be true for collaborative divorce, where you see there is an enhanced team. And again, I'll reference back to the forensic accountant or financial professional who's neutral. It could also be that there is a divorce coach in there who is a trained licensed psychotherapist, but they're supporting the communication between the parties, not serving in a psychotherapeutic role to a particular individual, certainly not to both at the same time. There could be business valuation experts, real estate experts, corporate or tax attorneys who need to get called in. It just depends on the complexity of the case. If they're dissolving corporations or transferring shares in a corporation, whatever the case may be, every case will have different nuances attached to it. But the parties certainly can, by agreement, and they can think about this, who do we want to bring to this team? And another thing that I would add is, unlike most of the mediators that I know in California, I'm not saying all, but most, will only do joint sessions with both parties present at the same time. What I find is before the case gets started, I will sometimes do the intake, the initial consultation first, so that both parties can hear what mediation is and go over the process. But oftentimes I'll invite each of the couple, each partner, each one will have a private session with me so I can better understand what might be an obstacle to getting a case resolved. For me, that's really important. And I also offer an opportunity to have private sessions as we go. If someone feels that it's just not going to work to be in the same Zoom room or physical room, I will do what a lot of the private judges who are retired judges do in the bigger organizations that offer the judging services. I will shuttle bus between the two or take them one at a time. But I'll make sure to give equal time for each, and that has to be agreed upon in advance in writing by both parties. So if the parties agree to that, I can do the private sessions because I'm not a judge ultimately. I basically can hear anything from the parties, and I don't, unless there's some exception to the rule that we set up in the retainer agreement. Generally, everything is confidential, and I don't share what one party says to the other unless there's some kind of, physical risk or something like that. So that's enhanced team mediation and the possibility of having joint or private sessions. And then the other thing I would add is that both parties can consent to appoint neutral experts, or they can hire their own experts and consultants off to the side. If I'm the mediator, I'm fine with each having their own, forensic accounting support in the background. I would hope each would have an independent consulting attorney. And if there's another mediator who already has the case, I'm going to sit as the independent consulting attorney and in the background help my client to make sure that he or she will get, the best deal that they can get. By strategizing with them and making sure that we've taken into account all of the assets, all of the tax implications, etc. So with that, I hope that overview is sort of helpful around what process options there are. And now I'm going to turn to the team and particularly to Claire, who's going to talk to us a bit more about high conflict personalities. And I'll allow her to introduce herself. And so we thank you, Claire, for joining us today.
Thank you. My name's Claire Heiglin. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist for the last 25 years. I have dealt with a lot of high conflict personality. A lot of the personalities I'll be talking to about today are considered personality disorders. And they are a group of people that are difficult to manage. They don't respond well to therapy, but you need to know the differences between them. First, we'll start out with the antisocial personality disorder, which you guys know as a psychopath. And they are cruel, calculating, and masters of manipulation. They are habitual liars, and they will get what they want however they need it. They are usually really organized, and they set goals, and they make great CEOs of companies because the one quality they have is they have no regard for people. They have no remorse. They have no feelings for them, and they have no empathy. And if you take a brain scan of them, you'll notice that in the brain scan, there is no activity in the emotional center of the brain towards people and animals. So it usually is, we know who they are by age 8. We call them conduct disordered children. Psychopaths are genetic. They come in families. And these kids are your fire setters, the bullies at school. They're the ones that are telling your kids to kill each other. And they grow up, and by 19, we really diagnose them as a psychopath. When you meet one, you'll be it's a unique experience because they're superficially charming, and you'll be in a relationship, you'll be talking to them, and you'll feel that something's off. They're piercing you in the eyes. They're summing up your fears, and the hair on your forearm will actually stand up. And that is your cue that you are in the presence of a predator and you are their prey, actually. You are not in a relationship with a psychopath. A psychopath is controlling you. They tell you what to do, how to dress, what to be. You live your life according to their rules. They have absolutely no regard for the law, any regard for authority figures, any kind of person who's going to try to say no to them. And what they do simply is they will become very difficult, violent, and many times, even though most of you consider them murderers, it's really not. They may not be. In a relationship, there is that relationship. And because of that, in a divorce, the problem is that they believe they own you. You are alive because they are allowing you to be alive. You are existing because they allow it. So a lot of times what you'll see with psychopaths, particularly around finances, which I find interesting, is they're not good with finances. In fact, they don't pay their bills. They don't pay their taxes. And they'll hire people and they won't even pay them. They feel that they are superior to everyone and that everyone's below them. So in negotiations for divorce, it really just depends where you are on the spectrum with them. If they have found someone else and they're willing to let you go, mediation is a real possibility. If you're in a situation where you want the divorce or they don't want you to go, then it can be very high complex. Because they feel they own you, they don't really know how to compromise. And that's what makes them incredibly difficult. They're impulsive and they're reckless, and they put people in very dangerous situations. Then you branch off to, they're still psychopaths, but they're called sociopaths. And these are people who have very shallow, transitional relationships. You know, the people, they go from one thing to another to another. They never seem to get on their feet educationally, financially. Their work life is very scattered and checkered. Most of the time, they're mostly unemployed. But the sociopath needs you. That's the difference. They need you because they need your stability your money, your fame, to get to something that they want and to give them credibility. And usually you'll know them as your grifters. These are the con men and the frauds. They come up to you and say, you know what? We just have a great product and we have a great new business that's going up. It's a crypto business. It's a tech business. It's any kind of business. And what you'll hear and what I want you to listen for is the way they talk about it. You will be fabulously wealthy. You can't believe the opportunity you have today. Your children will go to the schools they want. Your parents will be taken care of. Everything's going to be a dream. And that's how they manage. They are incredibly good salesmen. And they smile the whole way through it. So many people do invest in them. The problem is there's usually not a business, or if there is, it goes bankrupt very quickly, or there's a problem with the product and it goes bust. In these cases, the sociopath, because they don't like the law, will do one of two things. Once they're discovered, they will either leave and not leave any trace of where they go because they don't want to get caught, or they stay and they continue the grifting. And grifting goes in families also. The kids will also be the grifters, and they can be very violent and very difficult people to deal with. And you're in a relationship with them because you serve a purpose and a purpose only. Then we move over to the borderlines. And borderlines are different in that they have a complete fear of being rejected and of being abandoned. And they will manage their whole life around that. They are moody, they are depressed, they are anxious. They are suicidal. They're your self-manipulators. You hear people go, oh, they're cutting. That's a borderline. The problem with the borderline is the relationships are so high octane and difficult and toxic. It is a lot of screaming. It is a lot of volatility. It is physical. It is a lot of domestic violence. And what is at the core of it is the borderlines feel empty. And when they find you, they want you to fill them up. But that's not possible for someone else to fill them up. So we call them the black widows in psychology, because what they do is they seduce you in, and you think you have found the greatest partner in the world. They are terrific. They just idolize you. You idolize them. You're having the best time in life. And then the axe comes down. And that is, it can be as simple as this. This really happened. They said, I really like the outfit you had yesterday. And that meant that you rejected them today. And once the idolization is gone, it goes into what they do is a blank stare, the borderline stare. It's a dissociative state that they go into. And what happens is that then when they regroup and come out of it, they go into anger and intense rage. And a lot of people say they're just had a psychotic break, or they're multiple personality disordered, or they're bipolar. And it's a very high conflict situation for you, because once they devalue you, their entire life now is setting aside that they want to destroy you. They will destroy your relationships. You can't have relationships when you're with a borderline because they have to be number one. So all your friends will go, your families will go. You see this a lot in domestic violence. And then what happens is these are the real, I call them Game of Thrones divorce. They will say to you, if I can't have you, no one will. And they actually mean that. And it won't just stop at divorce. You can divorce them and they'll still go on after the divorce. They're going to stalk, they're your stalkers. They'll stalk the people after this. So in mediation, it is impossible for a borderline because they have absolutely no control over their emotions. And their idea is, I'm going to destroy you. So they do not know how to compromise. And then you move over to the narcissist. The narcissist is easy because they talk about themselves all the time. They're grandiose. They feel that they're special. They feel they're very special people. They talk about themselves incessantly. They're conceited. They're self-centered. And the one thing about a narcissist is that you're in a very fake relationship with a narcissist. Here again, here's the problem. You don't matter to a narcissist. And it's hard for people to understand that. But when you're a baby, you know between who loves you and who doesn't. And a narcissist injury means that as an infant, your parents have been abusive, neglectful, or traumatized you to the point where you decide as a baby, you know what? They don't love me. I'm going to love myself. So they build like this bubble around them and nothing gets through the bubble. And they say, I will love myself and no one will get near me. And that's how they live their lives. They talk about themselves sometimes ad nauseum. You go to the parties, you know, and then they talk about themselves as a third person, oftentimes when they're still talking. They want to seek revenge. They want to have wealth. They want to be around the special people because they feel they're really, really special. And it is the emperor without clothes. They are boastful. And what they do is they have different types of personalities, though. Some of them are very shy and self-deprecating. And what they'll do is they'll pull you in because they're victims. And you have to take care of them. And then you'll go to their house. And the one thing people have always said is, it's a mausoleum of themselves. It's a shrine to themselves. There is no oxygen in that house of any person other than the narcissist. Narcissists don't care about people. They have no empathy. They have no remorse. They don't love their spouses. They don't love their children. And I think one of the hardest things when you see it, especially with a malignant narcissist, is you see these children go up to their moms or dads and say, you know, look at what I've done. I've done such a great thing. And aren't you proud of me? And there's no reply. And then the criticism starts because you can't compete with a narcissist. They always must win. They always must be on top. And you are nothing compared to them. And you never will be. So you see, even in the other types, you know, you have these people who they'll say, well, they're narcissists because they started a dog rescue. Well, many people start dog rescues and they're not narcissists. They just happen to love dogs. But there's a sense of manipulation and lying and deceit with the narcissist. They want what they want, and it's truly all about them. And then you have the antagonist, which is kind of like Larry David and Curb Your Enthusiasm. This person is just wakes up in the morning and is just absolutely furious with life. They have to talk about everything and complain all day long. They don't like the sun. They don't like they don't like the heat. They don't like what they got for dinner. It's not big enough. It's not small enough. You're not good enough. You don't weigh your dice. You're not pretty enough. And they just go on and antagonize you because they'll ask you a question and you'll answer it. They'll say, no, you know what? You're just not really smart enough for this. You don't know it. You couldn't articulate it correctly. And so in these cases, what you find is that it's such a one-way street that people walk into my office and say, I'm shattered. I just feel broken. And they are, because it usually lasts about 7.5 years to be married to a narcissist. But at the end, you are just left not wanting anything to do with them. And an interesting fact too, is if you ever sit down with a narcissist and say, this is what I need, or this is what I want, they give you this really blank stare. And the stare is just looking at it and saying, I don't really understand it because this has never been about you. And so you never get your needs or wants from them because they will never prioritize them. And a lot of it is you are there because they want you to. And in divorce, it can go mediation. If the narcissist, as I said, he's done with you, he's tired of you, you're arguing too much with them or something goes on, they'll go to mediation and they'll want to get rid of you because they can find someone else that's going to absolutely feel entitled to their specialness. They talk about gratitude all the time. You have to be grateful to them. You have to show gratitude. And so in high conflict divorce, really what happens is you don't really exist to them. And so they're not willing to compromise. They don't want you to have anything. They're not there to give you their money or their time or take care of the kids. And in the end, it just ends up just being that they will personally try to hurt you, because many of them are very cruel and know where your weaknesses are. So it is just depending upon where the people are in their relationships. This is a perfect example. I'll give you one. A borderline perfect example is Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt's marriage and their 7.5-year divorce. In the narcissistic case, which I found very funny, actually, I'm sorry, was married for 45 years. She wants a divorce. He doesn't. Grown child, wealthy couple, lives in a mansion. He since has moved out. He wants her to get out of the house. And the son is living there as well. This is the way a narcissist thinks. I need her to come back to me because I'm going to turn off the water in the house. And he does. He turns off the water. And he is very confused why she is not grateful that he has done so. Look at what he's done. He wants her to come back. Why doesn't she love him? And then he takes it a step further, thinking the better idea is to bring a porta potty in the backyard and put it up. And then it's the same thing. She's not showing me gratitude. I solved her problem. So you see, there's no acknowledgement of your needs or wants. So in those cases with the narcissist, they can be volatile. They're not good with money much of the time. And they will fight you on everything. They don't like paying child support. They don't like paying alimony. And they will fight you to the death a lot of times to do it. Or you just won't see the money at certain times. And in closing, I want to say this. Divorce is difficult. And a lot of people have different personalities. But you need to know that most people don't want to separate their assets, their kids, their money, and move on. So they act, I think, maybe in some of the, it's really sad in many ways how they act, but it's understandable. They're being rejected. And I often say to them, go home. If you know how to swim, find a pool that's heated and go into the shallow portion of the pool and have a tantrum. Don't yell, but just let it out of your system because it's very, very draining. And then go home, go to sleep. And then what I ask them to do is in the morning, you need to get prepared and get up to fight. It may be a small fight, but it's going to be a fight. And you have to be prepared for your attorneys, and you have to be prepared to protect your children, and you have to be prepared to protect yourself. And I'm going to hand it to Michael.
Okay, thanks. So first of all, Claire, great job in summing all of this up. And Lisa, terrific stuff.
Thank you.
So the question now becomes, what does all of this mean for a high conflict divorce, right? Why did Claire go through all of this? Why is she telling you this? The reason is because these days, the in thing is to call everyone a narcissist, right? Everyone's a narcissist. And everyone that's getting divorced is a narcissist. And it's all over social media. It's all over the internet. But the fact is, as Claire's just told you, everyone's not a narcissist. People can be a lot of different personality disorders. They can also be something called the Machiavellian, which is it's similar to a psychopath, but they do it on purpose. And there's also people who are just plain jerks. They're empathetic, they're remorseful, they just don't care, and they just want to be miserable. So can you guys still hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the question then becomes, why did Claire go through this? And the reason is because from a legal perspective in high conflict divorce, it's critical that we know what we're dealing with, that I know what I'm dealing with. So for example, let's say that I'm dealing with a psychopath and I think that, and I call this person a narcissist. And because I deem them a narcissist, I go ahead and I start implementing tactics and strategies based around the narcissistic personality. The problem we've got is that the the tactics that work against narcissists will not necessarily work against psychopaths. In fact, just the opposite can occur, right? With narcissists, you can flatter them, you can agree with them, you can build up their ego, and they're all about aggrandizement. They're all about they're getting the big ego. So if you play into that, you can sometimes get what you want. On the other hand, the psychopath is all about control and power, right? So if I start playing into and pumping up the ego of a psychopath, they may look at that and see it as a weakness, double down, litigate even harder because they think they're going in for the kill. They see it as a weakness and they'll go in for the kill. That's just one example. But the bottom line is we as high conflict attorneys have to know what we're dealing with, because it's not that hard if you make a mistake to go down the wrong path and make things twice as bad as they already are. And these are the stories that come up all the time from people who've been in litigation for 3, 4, 5 years. And they say, no matter what I do, things just keep getting worse. And it's often because there's a disjoint. It's disjointed between what the high conflict husband is doing and how the aggrieved spouse is perceiving it. And so she's actually playing directly into the hands of the high conflict spouse. So Claire, thank you for all that information. It's incredibly helpful from a high conflict perspective. All right, now let's take a look at the actual court process. And we've talked about whether or not mediation is possible. I said before that it is possible so long as the high conflict spouse has something to lose. If they have more to lose by going to court than they have by going to mediation, you can get anything done in mediation. We very seldom do collaborative divorces because there are only a handful of high conflict lawyers. And if we go into mediation and we have to then, get out of the case, leave the case, it's often problematic for the client to find another high conflict counsel. So instead, but that doesn't mean you can't mediate. Often what will happen is I'll go ahead and I'll file the case. We'll get into court, and then I will attempt to get the other side, using whatever leverage we've talked about, get the other side to agree to go to mediation, to go to Lisa, let's say. But we do it differently. There's no agreement that counsel will leave. It is a confidential process. Counsel sits there with their client, and they make sure that, especially if I'm representing the aggrieved spouse, I don't want the opposition to be able to use manipulation techniques against my client to get her to concede, right? So now Lisa won't fall for this kind of crap because she's been at this for so long. But there are mediators that don't know, that they don't know they're being manipulated. And often high conflict spouses are very good at it. They've had years and years of practice. In fact, oftentimes that's the only conflict resolution skill that they have is manipulation. And manipulation doesn't bode well in court. It also doesn't bode well, for the way legal analysis goes. If you're using manipulation instead of legal analysis, it often doesn't bode well in front of a judge. It often doesn't bode well in front of a mediator if that mediator is experienced. But there are a lot of mediators out there that are not as experienced as, let's say, Lisa. And so if you're in a high conflict situation, number one, you want to make sure that the mediator is extremely skilled, that they've been around for a long time, that they understand this dynamic, and that they're not going to allow themselves to be charmed into saying to the aggrieved spouse, "I'll just take it. It's going to cost you less money this way." Right. The second thing is that the court process itself is set up for what's called attrition. There's no way you can litigate every single case in court. It's not possible. If every case in court went to trial, the whole system would shut down. The whole thing would just break. Okay. So it's structured. The court process is structured to get both sides to look at this and say, this thing going to court is costing me more than it's worth. What am I trying to achieve? Well, I'm trying to get spousal support or child support. I'm trying to split up the assets. I'm trying to get a fair deal on custody and visitation. Okay. And every time we go to court, it's costing us a fortune and we're not really getting that much resolved. And this is costing more than it's worth. Let's just sit down and figure out a resolution. That works great if you've got two spouses who are angry at each other but are remorseful and empathetic, just normal, regular people, right? Eventually, they're going to look at this and go, we're depleting our own assets to fight with each other over an issue that we can resolve tomorrow in 10 minutes. So that's what the court system is structured to do, because if it isn't that way, everybody would say, well, we'll just go to trial. It's easy, it's cheap. We'll go to trial, and the court system would break apart. So that's the reason that things tend to drag on, is because court is set up for this attrition process. That attrition process, it benefits the high conflict spouse. And the reason it benefits them is because the high conflict spouse can then use that attrition, file motions, go in and do discovery motions, file all this crap in court, right? That really, they don't really care about one way or the other. All they're trying to do is, number one, make their spouse upset, stress them out, and cost them a fortune. What they're really trying to do is stall long enough that their spouse, and manipulate in between so that their spouse goes, you know what, I'm done. I've had enough. Give him whatever he wants, right? That's what that attrition process is set up to do. Now, the flip side of that is that the law benefits the aggrieved spouse. Here in California, especially, we've got community property, right? Half of everything acquired during marriage belongs to one spouse or the other. All property acquired during marriage is community property. It's owned by both spouses, with certain exceptions that we don't need to get into. If and when your divorce comes up, you can, your lawyer can tell you about that. But the bottom line is that the laws are set up essentially for equality, right? It doesn't matter whether you're the man or the woman, the kids benefit. There's a presumption that the kids benefit from seeing both parents. It doesn't matter, with certain exceptions, it doesn't matter how that money was acquired, if it was acquired during marriage, except by devise, bequest, or gift. But if it was acquired during marriage, then it's owned 50-50. So then the question becomes, well, now what? A lot of high conflict spouses will try to hide money, or they'll send it out of the country, or they'll give it to their friends, or they do all that kind of crap. So we have to do tracing and things like that. But the bottom line is that that's the perspective we're starting from. Attrition process in the court benefits the high conflict spouse, and the laws tend to benefit the aggrieved spouse. So what we want to do is get out of the attrition process and enforce the law, essentially. That's where we want to be, okay? So the question is, how do you do that with a high conflict personality? Well, there's two sides. I mean, number one is, do you go on the offensive? And number two is, do you go on the defensive? Now, the defensive is just to sit back and wait and see what they do and then respond. The offensive side is to actually take action in advance and try to get them cornered or force them into a position where they need to go and mediate, or it can only be or will benefit best from attorney to attorney negotiations, or be in mediation like with Lisa and stay out of court. And there's a saying, the best defense is good offense, right? That if you go on the offensive, that's the best way that you can defend against something. One of the things that, the point that Claire made was a good one, and that is that there's nothing that these high conflict personalities hate worse than, number one, being wrong. They're never wrong. And number two, being in a position where they're revealed, where their true self is revealed, because that way it's game over, right? Who's going to literally or figuratively get in bed with somebody if you know that they're a scam artist? Not going to happen. So they need to keep everything quiet. And the best way to do that is to put them in a position, without violating any ethical rules, to put them in a position where they realize mediation is in their best interest. Okay. So how do you do that? How do you do it? And the answer is it's complicated. Okay. And that's why there are only a handful of high conflict lawyers out there that understand this. But here's the best example I can give. Okay. So think about this, and I'm going to read it off of what I've written so that I absolutely get it right. Together, a bat and a ball cost $1.10. If the bat costs $1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? I'll read it again. Together, a bat and a ball cost $1.10. If the bat costs $1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Now, this is one of the tactics that high conflict lawyers will use, okay? Because anyone who's heard that, probably most people will think 10 cents, right? The ball costs 10 cents. But that's not the question. The question is, if the bat costs $1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Now, our mind automatically goes to 10 cents. And I suspect that most of the listeners here probably came to 10 cents. I did when I first heard it. But that's not how this works, because if the bat ball is 10 cents and the bat is $1, $1 minus 10 cents is 90 cents. The bat is actually 90 cents more than the ball. It's actually 5 cents. If the bat is $1.05 and the ball is 5 cents, then the bat is $1 more than the ball. So why do we get to 10 cents? How did we get there? And the answer is because there's two types of thinking. There's fast thinking and slow thinking, right? Most lawyers are supposed to be doing slow thinking, but they're human. And a lot of times they'll do fast thinking. Fast thinking is our automatic responses. Those things that, given the way the question is couched, we make an automatic assumption about the answer. Especially with difficult questions like that, what our mind does is it goes to an easier question for us that we can answer immediately. So we don't answer the actual question, we answer one that is easier for us. And that answer is often wrong. That's the immediate reaction, right? In the meantime, us lawyers are always supposed to be doing the slow thinking, the rational, logical, slow thinking. So with that, what we want is to be in that position, is to be in the position of the rational thinking. So in essence, here's the bottom line. The bottom line is that for high conflict lawyers, what we want is to get the other side in a position where they're thinking 10 cents. And for us to know that it's 5 cents. And if we can do that in every single or most of the situations that are in front of us, then the other side just keeps losing and losing and losing. And that can cause narcissistic rage. It can cause them to have a meltdown. But at some point, after they've been exposed enough and lost enough, there's a good chance they're just going to say, okay, I've had enough. Let's end this. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Michael and Claire. One of the questions that's coming up for me in this is, how do we support the lower conflict or the no conflict spouse who's dealing with all of this to muster up enough mental and physical energy to be able to, I heard Claire talk about like taking a swim in warm water and then kind of getting themselves ready. But I mean, just even listening to, without even being able to imagine what it's like to live with one of these high conflict personalities day to day, how do they muster up the strength to be able to contact the team of professionals to be able to really assert themselves? And the other thing is, while we're formulating that, is also, I just want to put a note out there that I've represented fathers and men and husbands who are in this position dealing with the high conflict females.
Yes.
So I know you said this at the beginning, but I just want to emphasize it's not only women who are dealing with these issues.
No, in fact, most of the borderlines are women.
Yeah.
And so it definitely can go both ways. As I said before, I'll repeat, the only reason I use that example is that so I didn't have to explain it every time I was, telling a story or something.
100%.
But it absolutely reciprocal.
So what
And
do
Lisa,
yeah.
I'll answer that question for you. How do they muster up the strength?
Yeah, please.
People's first reaction when they're hurt is to shut down and to hibernate. But in divorce, I have found the best way to help people is to make them understand that you need to get up and be prepared and fight. And by doing that, they stop being a victim. If you go in and you take a bunch of wine and crawl up with ice cream and you tell yourself this is the worst thing in the world, the tasking of getting the paperwork together, going out and getting the attorney, interviewing who you need, doing those things, answering the questions that need to be answered, and even thinking about what are you going to compromise on and what are you not. Where they get in trouble, honestly, is when they think that it's not going to be a big deal, or they're so shattered they don't want to. So I think the best advice I've ever given is I use the tantrum, I use physical rather than mental. Because when you do something physically, you get the anger out of your body, and you also get the sadness out of your body. And I think in order to try to bring yourself up to the task, you have to understand you have a goal too, and that's to protect yourself. And if you fail to protect yourself or your children, that becomes a problem in itself for you. So it's kind of like saying to someone, it's time to grow up, just for a while we get through this process. And usually you'll see that they do when they start to feel comfortable. When they start to win a little and they feel that they're getting their strength back, that they're protected by attorneys, that the law will protect them, that they don't have to take this anymore, you'll see that they slowly come up and say, okay, I can take this on. And they don't play the victim as much. It takes a while, but they do feel protected. And the attorneys that can make their clients feel protected usually get better outcomes from people who have suffered through these personality disordered cases.
Yeah, that's a great response. And it also is very action oriented and strategic. I'm wondering too if there are any thoughts with the two professionals on the line with me as well. Like, a lot of people turn to social media nowadays and they find their communities there. And I'm noticing that there's a lot on sort of what I'll call the domestic violence victims and people, and folks dealing with high conflict personalities. Oftentimes they're in the domestic violence realm as well, in terms of getting restraining orders. How do they stay out of the victimhood and, just ensure with social media that, they're not getting stuck by anchoring into these communities by just being, we don't want people being waiting in this, like waiting in the pool, so to speak, of feeling stuck or curled up or in this state of mind where they're not moving into action. What do we say to those people who are just on social media? How do they sort of pull it together?
Well, I can answer that. I mean, most of my clients, first of all, I say don't. Okay, that's number one. Number two is stay out of there. Talk to me or talk to Claire, someone like Claire, right? The second thing is that I've found with my clients that they become very empowered once they understand that they've been subjected to manipulation for the last God knows how many years, that everything they're feeling is directly tied to the manipulation that's been propounded on them for all these years. And once they see the relationship between the manipulation and how they're feeling, they start to understand that, number one, they don't have to feel that way anymore because that manipulation, we're getting rid of it. And the second thing is that there are alternatives to the manipulation. In other words, like I said before, the law protects them. And so once they understand, they've been told forever that they're nothing, that they'll be nothing, that they will never amount to anything, that if you leave me, I'll destroy you, I'll take the kids, I'll leave you broke, you'll be on the street, all that crap, right? So what they don't understand often is that they're protected in this process. The law protects them, their lawyer can protect them, and that manipulation will almost certainly no longer work in the end. And so then the question is, what manipulation are they going to try to use during the process? If the manipulation is going to help them at the end, how can we keep them from giving in during the process? And look, I don't get involved very much at all, actually, in the psychology side of it with regard to how to help. That's Claire's territory. But in terms of coaching and empowering people and letting them understand that they can become independent, I build that into my practice. I give them things to do that will help them learn that they can, after all these years, be independent and live on their own and do their own thing. So I don't deal with the psychological side of it, but I do deal with the practical side of it. And it helps a lot once you've built up the skills to understand all of a sudden that everything you were told was a lie. You can be independent. You can take care of yourself. You can do all this stuff. You can get a job.
Yeah.
And I'll address it from a psychological point of view. Originally, I think that these support groups, which I kind of look at social media as, were designed for people who were very seriously ill. And it's because it's a very different world when you're sick. I think that there is this idea that people's experiences are the same, and I think they're not. The first thing you learn in psychology is don't ever think two people, no matter what they're going through, have been in the same shoes. They have not. And I think there's a tendency in social media to, one, want to feel that you're in a community of victims. Two, that you can voice all of the pain that you're going through and there's someone willing to listen to it. And three, I don't think it's particularly healthy in respect to how you're going to move on from it, because your audience now is supporting you in a situation that you don't really want to be in anymore. You don't want to be the victim. So it's better to try to find outlets in your life that will make you feel empowered in life rather than go to the victim. And I find a lot of times with social media, unfortunately, it's very, very degrading. It is biased. There's a lot of people who will say horrible things. So whenever you share anything on social media, especially something very dear to you, you have to be careful that the haters aren't going to come. So it actually can do a lot more harm. And that's what I tried to tell them. You don't need social media for this. You need to go out and find friends and find a new life for yourself. And social media is going to keep you in a situation where you will feel always victimized, because by itself, it victimizes you. Why do these people that are strangers want to listen to your story? What's that about? So it by nature is victimizing itself. I think it keeps them in the trap, actually.
Yeah, so you take action. If you're going to have supports around you, in-person supports with your, family who are healthy, where you have healthy relationships, friends, sort of. And I think we haven't really talked about self-care, but I'm thinking there's just a maybe one last point here that you could make clear about self-care for people who are experiencing either high conflict or even a complex divorce. And there's, I've seen people sort of go in the fetal position around that too. It's a big overwhelm for somebody who's been married 15, 20, 25 years. So what self-care is out there, and just a quick checklist?
I don't know if I call it self-care. I think the nature of divorce is very difficult. It's rejecting, it is abandoning, and you're going to go through a lot of different feelings. You can go through grieving. Some don't grieve, some grieve. I don't think any two things are the same. But what I do find is that people who recognize that the relationship, as Michael has said, is unhealthy at some point and has been unhealthy for a long time, that it would make sense to move on to a better life, even if it means being alone or starting over with your children, that you start to begin to believe that there's something better in your life. And the self-care, people talk about yoga, they talk about Pilates, they talk about golf, they talk about a lot of different things, tennis, even sailing. I think whatever makes you happy and gives you a sense of peace is great. I think that you should stay away from the alcohol and the drugs to help calm your nerves, because it only adds a layer onto an already existing difficult problem.
Yeah.
And so I talk about nighttime a lot because people tend to get very, very sad at night. This is not the same life they wanted. And they will turn to things that possibly aren't in their best interest. So you know what? Read a good book, stay off the internet, do things that will make you feel good, cook a good meal, do something that you feel will take you out of that position that you're in. If you're in a panic position, I always tell people walk forward and count backwards, and then walk backwards and count forwards. It overrides the central nervous system. So there are practical things you can do, but I think what Michael and you have stressed is that you have to be in the process of divorce. You have to be there and be aware of what's happening and get to the actions necessary. And when you do that, hopefully the divorce will not last for years at a time, or the mediation will take quickly, or the high conflict will take quickly, depending upon it. What are you willing to give up? And it takes a while to rebuild someone. But sometimes they find something. They go on a trip and it's great, or they decide to move out of that house. They don't want to live in that house with memories anymore. Whatever they can do. But it is a problem for people, actually, because they do stay in this victimhood for a very long time, too. And if they want to turn the corner, they have to realize they weren't happy in the marriage anyway. Why not get rid of it?
Yeah.
You know?
But most of all, just get the professional help. I think that's what's really important here is don't just turn to social media and wade in the cesspool of others who are, I'll just use the word victims. But I mean, definitely
Yes.
It sounds like get into action, contact professionals, find out how you can get yourself moving forward, take action in the right direction for yourself if this is the path that you know you need to walk, that you're resolved, or you're not even sure, call the professionals, reach out for the help and find out, what options are out there. So I want to thank everybody today. We are over time. And so thank you, everyone, Michael, Claire. This has been hugely helpful. I hope that everyone has walked away with, if nothing else, just enough information and overview to understand what the processes are. I'm just putting up my Zonder Family Law contact over here. Michael, do you want to give do you have a website or a phone number or something you want to leave everyone with?
I do. It's my last name, heiklinlaw@gmail.com. And
Okay.
the best way to reach me is through email. So it's heiklinlaw@gmail.com.
Okay. And Claire, is there a way that anyone can reach you, or do you just go through
Yes,
Michael?
they can reach me by chaiklin@gmail.com,
Okay.
lowercase.
All right. Thank you, everyone. This has been really like a pleasure to get together with you and to collaborate on these concepts. I learned so much from everyone all the time. As much as we're learning all the time, there's always something new that we get from these collaborations. So I want to thank you both for that. And I wish everyone a great week.